Hi, my name is Andrew Gough and I'm the Managing Director of GCD Technologies, a custom software development company based here in Northern Ireland. For the past 20 years, we have been building custom software solutions for clients throughout the UK and Ireland. People come to us when they have software requirements that simply aren't met by existing solutions. This includes building custom workflow systems, unique customer experiences and brand new digital products. It's the digital product side of our industry that excites me most. How purely through code and pixels we can take an idea and turn it into an engaging digital product and create new business opportunities. We do this for our clients every day, but occasionally we have our own product ideas that we want to try. We've done this a number of times over the years, some more successfully than others. But each time it's been an opportunity to experiment with new technologies and techniques that further hone our skills. Today I wanted to share with you the journey we've been on since the summer with our latest digital product, Status. Status is the status board for Slack. The idea is quite simple. Slack has the ability to set your status with custom messages and emoji, but they aren't immediately obvious. You have to go and look for somebody to find what their current status is. Status simply bubbles up and displays everyone's current status on a single board. The project started life as an internal student project, but quickly became useful within our team, being displayed on screens around the office. That was when we were in the office, of course, but in March this year, when we moved remote, Status really came into its own. It helped our team share things like when they were starting early, finishing late, or heading out for a run at lunchtime. And what we found is it was not only was this information useful for making contact with people, but we found it helped address one of my biggest concerns with our team going fully remote. The idea of connectedness when we're not in the office. Although lots of crack goes on through Slack, you miss out on lots of what's going on in people's lives, especially for those who you don't speak to every day. Status really helps bridge that gap for us. The whole team can see when someone is out sick and send them a get well message, or find out that someone is really trying to get some focus time to prepare for a presentation. Probably the biggest thing that Status is not another tool that you have to update. You simply update your status in Slack where you are every day and it automatically comes through to Status. We find people use plugins for like Google Calendar and Office 365 that do this automatically for people. We have a couple of other neat features like our Online Now, which surfaces a list of avatars of who's online right now. This isn't about surveilling when people start and finish. It's about giving a snapshot of now. I like to think about it like a virtual look around the office. On our status cards themselves, we surface the clears after time. This is a guide as to when the status might change and can actually be quite useful if you're making plans to know when someone might be free. Remote working has been a huge shift for lots of us. Matt Mullenweg, founder of Automatic, the remote first company behind WordPress.com, talks about 5 levels of distributed work. Mullenweg describes how after years of practice, Automatic are probably level 4 on this chart. They have embraced asynchronous working, but the reality is for many organisations this is a real struggle, and many of us are somewhere between a level 2 and a level 3. With our days often punctuated with meetings and interruptions, Status helps bring transparency and often can help reduce interruptions and allow you to get work done. Today I want to talk to you about building Status, and in particular the challenges and rewards of building on top of a third-party API. Web APIs exist all around us. There are so many uses that we go to web APIs for these days, but it hasn't always been the case. Web APIs have seen massive growth in the past 10 to 15 years, and in particular REST was massively influential in making this happen. You may not know it, but REST was defined in the year 2000 as part of Roy Fielding's PhD dissertation, Architectural Styles and the Design of Network-Based Software Architectures. Roy may not be as well known as Sir Tim Berners-Lee, but he's been just as instrumental in the development of the internet. Not only did he come up with REST, but he also co-wrote the spec for HTTP and co-founded the Apache Server project. But I don't think he had an idea of how popular REST concept would become. SOAP had been defined as a protocol for web APIs about a year earlier and was becoming popular through support of the Java and .NET communities. SOAP, which stands for Simple Object Access Protocol, was anything but simple to implement and suffered from quite poor support in open source languages and frameworks. It was widely adopted and is still used widely today, especially in enterprise level applications. But around 2005, REST started to become more and more popular. The lightweight nature of JSON exchange over well understood HTTP methods, the human readability and universal support across many languages and frameworks helped REST APIs explode in popularity. This graph from Programmable Web shows from 2005 right through to 2019 the growth of availability of web APIs. This is only the ones Programmable Web is tracking, and probably a small fraction of the true number of APIs available on the web today. There are many benefits of building web on existing web APIs. For us, this product would simply not exist without the ability to extend Slack. Also, the fact that Slack has a vibrant marketplace of add-ons is a really useful sales channel for us. But building a business on top of a third-party API comes with many risks too. There are plenty of examples where this has been a really bad idea in hindsight. Foursquare and Google Maps are two examples of companies that built extensive ecosystems around their API. Foursquare, as you may remember, was a popular social network for checking in at locations, and the whole ecosystems of apps was built around it. Their popularity dipped and they pivoted to become a commercial API provider for their rich location data. This left many apps stranded with business models that simply didn't work. Google Maps again grew massively in popularity with embeddable maps around the web. Many unique applications leveraging Google Maps API were built before 2011 when Google changed their business model, introducing significant API limits and costs, which actually meant several business models were simply no longer viable or had to look for alternatives. Twitter is a business whose prominence can actually be ascribed to its API. At launch, it was only available on the web, and a whole ecosystems of apps grew around the Twitter API. But as Twitter looked to grow revenue and become more commercially aware business, they became more developer hostile, introducing significant API limitations in 2012, which prevented the creation of new third-party Twitter clients and stunting the growth of existing clients. Next, they started integrating features created by third parties into their core experience. It's hard to believe now, but initially, Twitter didn't even support images, and TwitPic was born to fill the gap. But in 2014, TwitPic had to shut its doors because it was no longer a viable business, because images are now very much a core part of the Twitter experience. TwitPic were no longer necessary. There are plenty of other examples of APIs that simply went away. Most recently, Dark Skies, a popular iOS weather app, which also has become a popular weather API, was acquired by Apple and are no longer accepting new applications for their API, and have indicated that support for existing applications will be going away at some point in the future. Parse is an example of a fast-growing platform as a service business. Founded in 2011, they were acquired for $85 million by Facebook in 2013. And by 2014, it was reported to power over 500,000 mobile apps. But on the 20th of January 2016, Facebook decided it wasn't right for them to continue to focus on Parse and announced they were shutting it down. To be fair to Facebook, they kept it running for another year and open sourced the code, but entire businesses were left with difficult and potentially costly decisions to make. We were aware of these challenges going in to build Status and the risks that it imposed. It's important that you assess those with any product you're building. There's a real risk that if what we build is popular, Slack could decide to copy it or change their terms and cut us off. I'm not a betting man, but Ryan Singer, head of product strategy at Basecamp, in his recent book Shape Up, talks about how they build products at Basecamp. He is openly critical of the pitfalls of agile development. Shape Up is the name they have given to their product development process. As with agile, they use the idea of cycles, but their cycles are much longer than your standard 1 to 2 week cycles. They believe 6-week cycles to be the minimum time required to design and build something meaningful. Instead of starting a cycle with a list of user stories, they give their team a shaped feature to develop and give them the autonomy to figure out how to execute their vision. To decide what to build, they use the concept of a betting table, where the team present pitches of what they want to build next, and the product team decide which pitches to bet on by committing a team for 6 weeks. Whilst I have no interest in gambling myself, I really like this idea of placing measured, limited bets on an idea and giving a team room to explore. Clearly we weren't as confident as Ryan and initially committed to a 2-week sprint on the project. But I have to admit, 6 weeks was about what it took to get the product to where we wanted it to be. Another influence on this project was a recent reread of The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. The core thesis of the book is built around the idea of build, measure, learn. You start by building an MVP, specifically designed for measuring the core concept of your product. But get it into real users' hands and start to learn and use your learnings to influence what you build next. And the cycle continues. But what is an MVP? This has been the topic of much discussion over the years. What makes a good MVP? I find myself having this conversation often, and it's certainly a topic open to much interpretation. But by definition, an MVP in the Lean Startup definition is the smallest thing that you can build that delivers customer value and allows you to learn something new. This seems like a simple concept, but in reality it's very hard. Technically, our first MVP was our internal product. Our internal status board allowed us to see how people use it within GCD and to learn from that. What bits were valuable and what could change when we went on to build Status. We were looking at building the next level MVP to allow us to get the product into the hands of others. The challenge was deciding what features would help us learn and what features we just wanted because we believed they'd make a better product. The technology stack that we built Status on starts with a client application built in React. This is something we're very familiar with as being our front-end framework of choice for several years now. But recent advancements like hooks and contexts have made the React development experience so much better, and we didn't feel the need to use Redux, a common choice for managing state in React apps. We built Status as a progressive web application. PWAs have come a long way in recent years in their ability to challenge native apps and create a viable, write once, run anywhere solution. Their biggest drawbacks remains limitations imposed by iOS with the lack of web push, hardware access and background modes. But Status needed two key elements and features of PWAs that we wanted to leverage. And that was the ability to install Status as a standalone mobile and desktop application. Especially on desktop, this was transformational for the use of turning Status into a glanceable app. The ability to launch and then easily switch from it instead of having it lost in a sea of tabs makes it so much more useful. Additionally, the update mechanisms built into PWAs have allowed us to push new updates to the client application. This is especially important for an application that's actually designed to be long-term running on screens around the office. When we detect an update and the user isn't interacting with the app, we simply refresh to load the new application. TypeScript has recently become one of our languages of choice for web applications. A single language that we can write both front-end and back-end applications is very compelling for developer productivity. Not having the context switch between languages. TypeScript, if you're unfamiliar, is a superset of JavaScript. That means all JavaScript is, by its very nature, TypeScript. But TypeScript adds a strong type system that allows a lot of developer type safety and increased productivity with accurate code completions within your chosen IDE. Our developers have adapted very quickly to it and really enjoy working with it now. We use the serverless framework, which significantly simplifies the deployment process of our AWS resources, making it very simple to get a CI/CD environment up and running. But serverless also allows for local development, creating local S3 buckets, lambdas, our database to allow for local development and debugging. Finally, when it comes to data storage, we chose to use DynamoDB. This is the first product that we have used DynamoDB on. It's a fast, flexible and highly scalable NoSQL database and seemed a good fit for our project. Moving on to the architecture, you can see we've chosen a really straightforward serverless architecture. A React app served from S3 via CloudFront. Our API runs on AWS Lambdas for all the key services. One interesting thing is that we have a CloudWatch timed event to cache presence and do not disturb. This was required because of strict API rate limitations by Slack. Another interesting thing is that when it came to reporting, we wanted a privacy-focused application, so we didn't want to put a lot of third-party analytics into the product. And we've good experience of creating our own dashboards with Google Data Studio. So we aggregate our data actually across the BigQuery. This allows us to do complex reporting without being worried about affecting the main application. Stripe was an obvious choice for handling billing for premium features. The Stripe Bill product produces a rich subscription management platform without having to do much work on our user interface. As I alluded to earlier, some of the issues we ran into included limitations with Slack and their aggressive rate limits. Sometimes this actually stopped us from being able to do what we wanted to do with the product. In other cases, it introduced additional technical challenges for us. Slack also have a range of 3 different APIs. Their Web API, their Events API, and an older deprecated RTM WebSockets based API. Each of the APIs has a different capabilities and different limitations. There were some features that we wanted to use that still existed in the RTM API, but didn't exist in the other APIs yet. But being deprecated, we were reluctant to use it. Another issue we hit that we haven't been able to solve yet was actually a social login bug. When you start to log in with Slack Flow, it takes you through Slack's login process before prompting for permission to use our app. If the user chooses to log in with Google, Slack completes the login without actually completing the authorization to use our app, and instead logs the user into Slack's web interface, meaning the user has to start the process all over again. This is a terrible user experience, but it's completely outside our control. One limitation we hit with DynamoDB was their item size limit. Our initial implementation involved a very flat table structure with a single accounts table which contained all the information we needed for an entire account. This worked great in our internal tests, but then we discovered the 400 kilobyte item size limitation with DynamoDB. Our team of around 40 was hitting 200k item size. It simply wasn't viable to leave that setup assuming there could be teams of hundreds of users eventually using the system. This forced us to refactor the data model. When it came to commercializing status, we were pretty clear from the outset it would be a freemium product. It's a pretty well tried and tested model within the Slack ecosystem. Lots of Slack add-ons are free with premium features available at cost. We plan to experiment with the pricing over time, but our initial launch involves a 30-day free trial of the full product, and then we cut down to the essential status-only feature after 30 days. We wanted to make status an incidental purchase, so we're initially launching at £10 a month or £100 a year for your entire workspace, but we'll continue to apply the build, measure, learn principle here and see what happens over the next few months. When it comes to how we approach launching status, we started out by testing it internally. After building our internal MVP, we then started to roll it out to some other companies that we knew, getting feedback on what they liked and what they felt needed improved. And we're now at the stage where we want to start a wider rollout. That starts today with the launch of our online sign-up. The plan is to start talking more widely about status and onboarding clients into an early beta. Later in the year, we're planning a wider launch on Product Hunt and starting to talk in places like Hacker News, social media, and other Slack communities about what we're doing with status. This isn't going to be a big budget marketing launch, but more of a process of keeping talking about the product and looking at how we can encourage viral adoption. For us, the next stage really is to continue that build, measure, learn cycle. And we're very much entering into the next iteration of measuring and learn to decide what to build next. We have lots of ideas of what we'd like to build. We'd love to add support beyond Slack to Microsoft Teams. There's actually an API limitation stopping us from doing that right now. But we'd potentially also like to add support for Workplace by Facebook and other platforms if there's demand. We also have other features that we'd like to look at, asking the question of how we can make people feel more connected. Can we offer features like kudos or reactions within status? We also have other ideas that are still very much in discussion. We've learnt a lot already building status. When approaching an MVP, often the biggest challenge is deciding what not to build. It's easy to decide what you are going to build, but actually when you strip a product back to its core, you have to decide what features that you're going to invest in now that will allow you to measure and learn, and what to leave and build next. Another important lesson was that it's okay to bin your prototypes. Joel Spolsky, co-founder of Stack Overflow, a website many of you will be familiar with, among many other things, has a famous blog post from the year 2000 titled Things You Should Never Do, where he talks about Netscape and how they made the single worst strategic mistake that any software company can make. They decided to rewrite the code from scratch. Whilst I agree with the overall thesis, I think prototypes are definitely an exception. Our team decided to build upon the initial prototype that had been built a year earlier, but there were so many changes we wanted to introduce to the architecture, including replacing the entire back end, that in hindsight, starting from scratch simply may have been the better approach. Simple can be hard. Even the simplest ideas can really have really hard challenges. And we often find that great products that seem simple and effortless to use are more often than not the result of a lot of care and attention to make them appear simple. We certainly thought a lot about every interaction and how we could provide a simple, effortless experience. I wanted to mention a couple of the books that I've found useful recently. I mentioned the Lean Startup earlier, and it's a great read whether you want to actually create a new startup, but also if you want to drive innovation within an existing business. Shape Up by Ryan Singer of Basecamp is also a fantastic book exploring how they work within Basecamp. Even if you're happy with your current process, I always find learning how others work to be really insightful. And you never know, you might find something that you want to steal or borrow. Hooked is another great book I read recently. It's slightly controversial in terms of how it talks about a lot of the techniques that social giants use to keep us engaged. But it's a really great exploration of how to drive customer engagement with your products. I hope you find something that you can take away from my talk today. It's certainly been a learning experience for us. My contact details are on screen if you have any questions. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.